Hello, my name is Jameson Choi, and my topic is sports performance and the tempo of music. So, for the importance, an athlete needs to perform at their highest level at all times. This is usually defined by what we call sports performance. According to Blake Hexton, a National Olympic team rower, music is a nice way to kind of diffuse the tension of competing. From a personal standpoint, as an athlete myself, I feel that music is a necessity before playing for the same reason as Blake, as I feel it calms me down before a big game or a match. So to give you some context of the study, the mind has a direct correlation with sports performance. Going off this point, every athlete should develop mental skills along with their physical skills to reach their full potential, to maximize what they can do in a big game. So how is music correlated to this idea? Well, it was found that constant stressors create higher levels of uncertainty in a match, or create uncertainty, and this can overall affect your performance in different ways. In relation to this idea, music entails emotional and motor arousal and has a direct effect on stress levels. So as a result, music has a potential to affect sports performance. The next literature review is motivation. My first literature review is motivation. It was found that the higher level athletes had significantly higher levels of motivation compared to recreational athletes. Motivation is a direct effect of self-efficacy, which is the belief that a goal will be accomplished through a series of steps. It was found that people who lose their motivation end up doing worse in performance as it affects their mental state. The next literature review is stress levels. According to a study, sedative music showed significantly lower tension and state anxiety levels. Contradicting this study, another study states that in an interview, a person interviewed a Canadian athletes, and they claimed that high energy songs with high tempos reduced their stress levels. These two sources show a significant gap as they contradict one another. It's also important to note that neither happy nor sad music makes a difference when it comes to stress levels within a person. The last literature review is emotional responses. Interpretations can vary depending on their emotional musical stimuli. However, it was found that faster tempo was associated with happiness, and slower tempo was usually associated with sadness. Lastly, a study was conducted on college students with excessive anxiety, and it was found that music therapy is a great way to relieve stress within an individual, but it is usually based on a person's emotional response to music. So for the gap, the gap is that most of these studies that were conducted in my literature review, they mostly focused on college students and adults, and this study is going to be focused on high school teenage males. And another gap is that there was a contradiction in one of my studies talking about like how music affects stress levels, as one talked about low tempo music relieving stress levels, and another talked about high tempo music relieving stress levels. One was a study done by a researcher, and the other one was an interview done on actual athletes. And then finally, there have been no previous studies on the tempo of music and and the perception of sports performance. Most of them talk about actual performance, but none of them talk about the perception of sports performance within teenagers. So this leads to my research question. Does high tempo music and low tempo music help with the perception of sports performance? So starting out with the methods, my study used a quantitative analysis that was divided into two specific parts. A questionnaire methodology, which was then, and the answers were transformed into a Likert scale. And this Likert scale would eventually be used for a Pearson correlation. And we would be using, and I utilized an anonymous survey to get the most amount of respondents. For the survey format, the beginning consisted of collecting background information and data based on my mentor studies. By asking for their age, grade, ethnicity, religion, and their socioeconomic status, the study could find any potential correlations of the answers to the demographic information. The rationale for the Likert scale was that it allowed the possibility of converting these answers from the questionnaire into numerical data points from 1 through 5. This scale was used in a study that took a look at perceptions and attitudes. So I found it easy to use it because it had a similar idea of what it was asking based on perceptions. So this is an example of a Likert scale that I use in my study. As you can see, I did a questionnaire. I asked if they strongly agreed to strongly disagreed, and it showed a bar graph. So for the recruiting population, to recruit students to answer my survey, I emailed it to different instructors of students, and the estimated participant goal for me was 150, but the amount of actual participants I got was 154 responses. This is a breakdown of the demographic information. First of all, you can see that there is a huge difference in the amount of respondents that were white compared to other minorities. As you can see, there's 72.3% of respondents were white, and second, coming in behind is 24.1% of respondents that were Asian, and this shows a significant difference. The other demographic was age. It was found that 35.8% of students were 15-year-olds, and this reflected when I asked them what grade they were in, majority of them said they were freshmen and sophomores. I answered my survey, so this pertains to that. This is really interesting to me. The majority of students that responded to the survey, 60.6% of them declared themselves as upper middle class, and there's only one respondent that declared themselves as in the lower class, and there's a significant difference between the lower class and upper middle. And for religion, 75.9% of students declared that they were Christian. Following behind that, almost 17% of them declared that they were atheists and they didn't believe in any type of religion. So for the data procedures, I did an analysis of data through a correlation graph, a Pearson correlation graph, and I would relate their commonalities to the background information. And I chose the 5 most important Pearson correlations and produced them into graphs, as you can see. So the first graph is the value, the R value was 0.58, and what we compared was listening to high tempo music before a big game / match, versus high tempo music that's to be pumped up before a big game and match. And you can see that most students agreed that they usually listen to high tempo music because it got them hyped up. And there's a strong correlation, but there isn't a significantly strong correlation. The next Pearson correlation value is 0.05, and this had like almost zero correlation. And the topic was low tempo music that's been calm and relaxed on a normal basis versus listening to low tempo music predominantly before big games. So you can see that even though students agreed that that low tempo music has been calm and relaxed, they disagreed on the fact that they would listen it to before big games and matches. The third correlation graph had a value of 0.72, and this shows a significant correlation. Most people agreed that listening to low tempo music, they listen to low tempo music predominantly when they have a big game / match, and then I compared it to low tempo music that's being a competitive mindset. So both of these, most students agreed that they would not listen to low tempo music before a big game and a match, and they also disagreed on the fact that it gets them in a competitive mindset. So this is why it had a high correlation, because most students did not listen to low tempo music because it did not get them in the right mindset. The next correlation value is 0.61. It compared that high tempo music gets them in a competitive state, and then it also compared the fact that I listen to high tempo music before a big game and match. And it shows that there is a correlation in this, although it wasn't as strong. There's some similarities between students agreeing that high tempo music does get them in a competitive state. The last correlation value is 0.06, and it said the type of music high school boys listen to versus the competitive levelness of their sport. I chose this one specifically because I would assume that athletes listen to high-tempo music, especially based on the results that I saw from my initial questionnaire. I was surprised that the correlation value was this low. So for the discussion, majority of respondents said that low-tempo music gets them calm and relaxed compared to high-tempo music. This agreed with one of the literature reviews with a study from Zhang and her colleagues. Also, it can be noted that 80% of respondents prefer to listen to high-tempo music before big games and matches, which is in alignment with the interview with the Canadian Olympians. As they said, they preferred high-tempo music as they believed it reduced their stress levels. For the limitations, I would have expanded into other demographic groups because the majority of respondents were white and upper middle class and Christian. Since we go to Brophy College Preparatory, a private Jesuit school, the majority of students reflect the respondents that answered. Getting a more diverse group would have really helped, and I wanted to see if there could be any difference between the demographic groups. In conclusion, there's a commonality between music and the perception of sports performance based on the Pearson correlations that were stated. It can also be noted that higher number of athletes listen to high-tempo music. Finally, for future research, an experimental research design could be conducted. Rather than the perception of sports performance, which I tested on, actual performance should be tested. This study could be used as a baseline for future research, as it gives an information on what high school male teenagers think about the perception of sports performance pertaining to music. Thank you.
Nice job, Jameson. So the panel's got 3 questions for you, so I'll start. How did the choices you made when you were designing or implementing your research method impact your overall process? I know you went through a particularly complex process. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So initially my original idea was on music and depression. I found a lot, I knew I wanted to do something with music, so I went through a bunch of studies, and most of them talked about like anxiety levels and how it can be used for depression and as a factor of that. But then I was looking into more research, and I found that a literature review that talked about actual sports performance pertaining to music. But there wasn't really much studies on that, and I was like, and that really struck my curiosity, and I decided to go along with it, as in I attempted to fill that gap of between the perception of sports performance and high tempo music. I realized that like, even though people say that low tempo music gets them calm and relaxed on a normal basis, there were a lot of interviews on actual athletes saying that they disagreed with it, and I really wanted to target that gap.
Terrific. You talked a little bit about future research, but how do your findings specifically provide the context for that future research? Could you connect your research to what maybe a future study would look like?
So although I took a look at the perceptions and attitudes on what they thought, like if they did well or not, it doesn't actually pertain anything to actual performance. However, my study could be used as maybe a baseline to see like how high school male teenagers think, and like how they think music helps them in the way that they do. And actual research could be tested to maybe see that this is actually true when it comes to actual performance or not. And they could use maybe the correlations from my study to pick out certain ones and see if that was true or not.
Okay, terrific.
Okay, question I have is about skill development. What skill did you develop in this process?
So I think a really good skill I developed was analyzing literature reviews. I took a look at a lot of different studies and articles that pertain to music and sports performance in general, and I like broke it down into multiple parts. And I think a skill that I really learned from this is how to look at a literature review and how to connect it with your discussion, because I found like there were a lot of similarities in some of the studies that I looked at originally, and how it like somewhat correlated to one of my Pearson correlation graphs. And I thought it was really interesting how one supported one and it contradicted the other, and I thought that was a really useful skill that I picked up.